Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host DD and joining me once again today is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we'll be talking about the Silverstone GP. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions, and dive right into the conversation. Vedant, the gloves are off and the championship is definitely on after that last Silverstone race. What were your thoughts?
Well, I'll be honest. I was expecting this for a long time now. I mean, we are 10 races into the season and we have seen both of them clash numerous times. But especially after the start of the sprint on Saturday, the first lap battle that these two had, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, I was kind of expecting a crash. Obviously, the magnitude of it was much higher, and obviously we are very thankful that Max Verstappen is okay, because but yeah, I wasn't surprised as such.
Definitely, and a lot of comments from both Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen after the race. Hamilton commenting that Max drives needlessly aggressively, and Max coming back saying that Hamilton's celebrations after the race were disrespectful, especially since he knocked him out, and that 10-second penalty was not enough since it did not hamper Lewis Hamilton's race per se. But yeah, I mean, I think we have reached the point where all the gloves are off, and we're gonna see these two clash again and again. Hopefully, they'll come out unscathed every time, and it'll be a good battle instead of what happened on lap one in Silverstone this weekend. But I mean, the championship is on. Max was leading Lewis by 33 points before the race on Sunday, and he's only leading Lewis by 8 points going into the Hungarian GP weekend before the summer break. And Red Bull were leading Mercedes by over, I think, 40 points or something, and now they only lead Mercedes by 4 points. I mean, the championship is level. And again, I know, in the preview, we were talking about what would have happened had Lewis won in Baku. The championship would have been level, and we wouldn't be talking about how Max is running away with the championship. I think it's the same thing. Just 4 weeks later, we've come to the same result. But this is so exciting. I mean, obviously we had our doubts, that Red Bull were ahead, but Mercedes brought in the upgrades this weekend, and definitely those upgrades have put them on pace with Red Bull. But we'll get into the individual performance later. Let's talk about the incident. The talking point coming out of the entire weekend, the largest controversial incident. What are your thoughts? Do you think Lewis was to blame? Do you think Lewis deserved the penalty? Do you think it was just a racing incident? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I agree with all the comments that have been going around, and comments by people in the journalism, like the Formula One journalists, and I think everyone agrees that it was a racing incident, and because both of them were to blame, because there was not one predominant attacker as such. Lewis was not to blame 100%, and racing incident, but of course I think the penalty was fair enough.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I land on the same page that Lewis deserved the penalty because he was the one attacking or getting the overtake done, trying to get the overtake done, and Lewis was not on the racing line. Even though Max, people have been saying that Max turned in on Lewis. In my opinion, Max was on the racing line and he was just doing what he would have done had Lewis not been attacking him, and Lewis was the one offline. So I think Lewis had enough space to squeeze his car through the cops corner. But just a car's width, and I think that was fair enough. But obviously, I think Lewis just thought that they were both going into the corner, and Max would be a bit more respectful. But I think because Lewis himself comes out and says, he knows that Max drives aggressively, and if he was trying to be smart, then he wouldn't have done it. But obviously, he knew what was online, and the win meant so much to him, and he knew. And from the sprint race, he knew that the first lap mattered the most. Whoever had the lead during the first lap would have to clear air and would make it. And we saw Lewis struggle behind Charles, so he knew that he would have to get the overtake done on the very first lap to make it count. But
Absolutely.
again, like I said, I think the penalty was fair. I know there's a lot of people coming out and saying, but Lewis still won the race, so it didn't really hamper him. But Max really, really suffered. But I think we need to remind ourselves that these penalties are not given out, or should not be given out almost, based on the effect it has on on how the person who got hit and got the worst of it during the race, like Max Verstappen, whose race got absolutely annihilated. You can't base the penalty on that. You have to base the penalty on the kind of driving incident it was, the kind of foul, or what the mistake was, not what the outcome of the mistake was. So, which is why I think the penalty was completely fair in that regard. But I definitely think racing incident, but definitely Lewis should have been a bit more careful, especially since Max was simply taking the racing line. Because we saw what happened to Charles later on, right, in the last moments of the race when Lewis overtook him on Cobb's corner. Charles tried to respect Lewis's space and he went a little bit offline. He got into on the dirty side of the track and basically his rear end washed out, and that's how he lost the place to Lewis. So on the first lap it would have been the same story for Max had he tried not to be on the racing line going into the corner. And I think again Lewis was carrying a little bit more speed than he would have had he tried to stick to the apex or the inside line of the corner.
Yeah, and I mean we heard from Lewis Hamilton and he said he is not going to be bullied into giving up places and backing out of fights, and I think that's just what influenced that move, because we have seen over the course of the season a few times now Max and Lewis have come together, and every single time Max Verstappen has come out
on top. Yep.
Exactly. So I think, and of course it was Lewis's home race with a full capacity crowd, so I think that meant a little more to him, and that is where he wanted to prove to Max Verstappen that, see, I'm in this championship as well, it's not your championship.
Absolutely, couldn't have been a better place to get the championship going once again for Lewis Hamilton. Look, I said, Lewis comes back in the second half, and this is the second half now going into the summer break. You're almost there. So, and, kudos to Mercedes. They brought in updates. Toto Wolff didn't play down at all. Lewis was playing down the updates before the weekend. But Toto Wolff said, we're going to beat them by, half a minute or something. Obviously, that was a bit of an exaggeration, but they were definitely on pace. Really surprising to see Lewis put it on pole, on Friday during qualifying. And then pretty much, follow Max Verstappen around for 17 laps during the sprint race. So the pace is there. Even Bottas had a decent weekend, I would say. Couldn't make up any places on the softs, but he had the pace in the car, and he looked like the leading Mercedes almost, halfway through the race after Lewis's 10-second time penalty. But Lewis had some insane pace on those hard tires compared to the mediums on which he was struggling a whole lot behind Charles.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, see, Mercedes were faster on the straight line this weekend than Red Bull, and the upgrades clearly worked, because in Austria they were the slowest car at the speed trap, right? And this weekend they were the fastest ones. So the upgrades clearly worked. I mean, I wouldn't say, as you said, that Bottas had a good weekend. I wouldn't say that, because for me it was a typical Valtteri Bottas weekend. He finished where he was supposed to finish in that Mercedes.
But I think the important thing is, he picked up points that he had to, especially since the Red Bull had a disastrous weekend. So, it was really important that Valtteri finished in the top 3 to,
exactly.
get them closer to the championship.
He did his
job.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because we've seen Valtteri, falter. Like, back in Imola, Valtteri was out in P10. Then he had a really bad race. But that was not his fault in Monaco when Lewis was, Lewis was not really in the points throughout the race in Monaco, and then Valtteri couldn't pick up that podium either because of the pit stop issue. So we've seen Valtteri struggle this season, but it's good to see him back in action and doing Valtteri things. We would definitely like more from him, but anyway. So, 8th British GP win for Lewis Hamilton. Let's talk about Red Bull. Everything that could go wrong went wrong for Red Bull this weekend. They did manage 3 points in the sprint race, but that was the highlight of the weekend for them, really. Perez struggling throughout the weekend, really uncharacteristic. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, uncharacteristic. Obviously, Sergio Perez needs to get those performances in, because we can see like his performances have not been consistent and have not been at the top of the game. So if he needs that contract next year, which obviously he needs, and obviously Red Bull would want someone, because every other driver that they can pick up is not as experienced as Sergio Perez. So I think heading into the summer break, Sergio Perez needs to come back very consistent and perform consistently in the second half.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Even in qualifying, Perez was not on pace with Max Verstappen at all. I think he qualified P6, if I'm right. P5 behind Charles Leclerc, you know.
Yep.
So that goes to show that Perez was definitely on pace. And he had a lot of trouble. You know, we saw him lose the car even in practice and qualifying, coming out of the last corner. And a lot of people struggled with that. You know, the track was pretty green. Wasn't as green, you could say. Sorry, the track was green, you could say. And, you know,
pretty green, yeah.
They were definitely struggling. But Max Verstappen, you know, what can he do to come back? Because usually, like at least this season, we've seen a really mature Max. And this was like probably the first time when things went wrong and he could have done something about it. And he's come back, you know, with some words for Lewis Hamilton. He's not very happy. And Christian Horner definitely, you know, taking his driver's side. And I kind of agree with Christian Horner to some extent. But what is the next step for Max? Because we've seen take the fight to Lewis Hamilton and we've seen him, you know, keep the fight up. But now it's Lewis Hamilton taking the fight to Max Verstappen, and we've not seen that happen before.
Yeah, I think the first most important thing is to win in Hungary, because if Max Verstappen comes second in Hungary and Lewis Hamilton wins, the difference would be 0.
Absolutely.
Right? And that the championship would restart in the second half. So I think a win in Hungary is very important for Max Verstappen to keep that edge over Lewis Hamilton. But of course, I mean, he's a professional driver. He is more mature this season than we have seen him ever in Formula 1. And he's very composed this season. So I think he'll bounce back pretty well, pretty quickly. And yeah.
Absolutely.
Can't wait for the championship to continue heated.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the championship becomes a Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton 2016 championship, really, you know. Nico was not one to back down, and I think Max could follow in those footsteps too. But talking about home teams
Definitely.
And the home crowd, Lando Norris finishing a spectacular P4 in front of his home crowd. Great result for McLaren, you know, P4, P5 taking away a lot of points from this weekend. I think they'll be really, really happy with the results, especially Zach Brown, who missed out on the race because of a positive COVID test.
Yeah, definitely. Lando Norris, once again, the most consistent performer still in Formula 1. This was his 9th top 5 finish in 10 races so far this season. And Daniel Ricciardo registering his best finish in a McLaren with a P5. So definitely a very positive weekend for McLaren, and especially for Daniel himself personally, because he needs those positives and he needs those, you know, results to stay motivated.
Absolutely, you know, Daniel was only out qualified by Norris, you know, by 0.002 of a second. So that goes to show that he had great pace in qualifying. In the race, it could have been better. He was definitely, you know, not as close to Lando Norris or lapping as fast as him, but you know, small steps, I guess, and it'll be great to see Daniel back the way we want him to be, you know, taking the fight to Lando and that team. But really disappointing for Lando Norris with that slow pit stop, you know. 6 seconds in the stop put him behind Bottas, and then Lando could never jump Bottas throughout the entire race. It's kind of disheartening. There could have been a podium in the works if Lando had some free air and could have taken the fight to Charles towards the end of the race.
Yeah, I mean, even the commentators said, and I texted you, that Lando could, you know, theoretically win the race because he had good pace. He was ahead of Bottas. Hamilton had a 10-second penalty, and Leclerc was having engine issues. So Lando Norris was, you know, de facto leading the race after all these things resulted, but a poor stop.
Absolutely.
Very unfortunate for him, yeah.
That just goes to show, you know, when you say all those things, that just goes to show like how hard or like, you know, the insane pace that Lewis Hamilton had in that second stint of his on the hard tires. You know, he had a 10-second stop. He was behind. He came out behind Valtteri for sure. He came out behind Lando too, maybe.
Yeah.
And then he
Yeah,
overtook
yeah.
every one of them, and it wasn't like he had very fresh tires or anything like that. He was nearly on the same strategy as everyone else around him, and Charles pitted after him. And yet Lewis had some insane pace in that car in the second stint. Goes to show, that he's really turned it on. Talking about Ferrari, closing the gap to McLaren this weekend. They were going into the weekend. I think Ferrari were trailing McLaren by 19 points in the Constructors' Championship, but they made up 4 points this weekend, and now the gap between the two teams is down to 15. Great weekend for Charles Leclerc, finished P2. I don't think they could have asked for a better result. Definitely disheartening that they missed out on the win, but all in all, I think that was the best Leclerc has been this season in my opinion. And then again, kind of disheartening for Sainz, a 12-second stop, but overall great pace on the car from Carlos Sainz. Getting stuck behind Daniel Ricciardo didn't work out for him in the end, but I think overall a great recovery from Sainz after his incident in the sprint race.
Yeah, definitely. The Ferrari had quite the pace this weekend, and I mean, obviously Leclerc qualified quite well, and we have seen him qualify well this season throughout. And even their race pace was decent enough, and to win the race. Essentially, he was leading the race just 3 laps from the end. So obviously, Charles Leclerc pulling out everything from that Ferrari and keeping it on the table. Carlos Sainz had the pace for a good result, a top 5 result, but a 12-second stop put him behind Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, and Daniel drove really well defensively. He defended from Sainz pretty much throughout the entire race. But Leclerc nursing a lot of issues in that car yesterday and still coming out on top. Basically, I was just happy to see Leclerc not out of the points. Not having another Monaco basically. So I was just hoping that Charles doesn't retire through the race. But really promising. I was really not.
But I think like theoretically, had those engine issues not been there for Charles Leclerc, he could have won the race. One could imagine that, and that just goes to show how far Ferrari have come.
Absolutely.
From the woes of last season.
And I mean, that might have been another factor, that played into why Charles didn't have that pace on the hard tires. They might have changed the settings, or they might have been nursing some other issues throughout the rest of the race. But it's hard to say, because on the mediums he was definitely gaining on Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton. But once he switched to the hards, Lewis Hamilton was lapping over a second faster than him for the most of the second stint. I was going to say, I wasn't really confident coming into the weekend about Ferrari and how they would, cope with the new rear tires that Pirelli introduced this weekend. But I think the new tires at least suited Ferrari in the hot conditions at Silverstone. They didn't struggle as much as other teams with the blistering and things like that. So obviously, Ferrari had things going for them this weekend, thankfully. And it was just lovely to see, a Ferrari lead the race for almost 50 laps. And I hope we can see some more of that. I mean, talking of next week in Hungary, Ferrari had a great weekend in Monaco, and people, after the Monaco weekend, people were like, all right, that car is one to watch out for in Hungary, and we're coming up to Hungary, so who knows, maybe a Ferrari win or another Ferrari podium is on the cards. So a lot to look forward to in 2 weeks' time. George Russell, that was one heartbreak, I guess, this weekend once again. 3 weeks in a row. George Russell puts it in P7 in Q3, I think. Put P7. But yeah, had that contact with Sainz and then still held on to like the top 10 positions at the end of the sprint race, but was given a 3-place grid penalty, and he had a really poor start in the race. But just can't put a weekend together, can this guy? No matter how much he tries.
Yeah, I mean, he's a qualifying genius so far this season, but especially the race pace doesn't seem to be there for Williams. Even in Austria, he had the pace throughout, but the race pace wasn't quite there compared to the Alpine, and Fernando Alonso overtook him. So definitely, and I mean, we know that Williams is one of the back markers, essentially, and with George Russell putting it in Q3 I don't know, 3 times this season so far.
3 times.
So,
Yeah,
I
3
think
times
that's-
this season, yep.
Yeah. So I think that's just the greatest positive that can be there. And especially once again the home race for George Russell and for Williams themselves, and you could hear the crowd roar and cheer him on in that Q2 lap.
Absolutely, but this goes to show, George has shown us how much pace that Williams car has, and it's definitely it's no more like a Williams versus Haas kind of car. We've seen the likes of Kimi and Giovinazzi put it really close to the points. P11, P12 in a few races, and I think the Williams is ahead of the Williams in George Russell's hands is ahead of the 2 Alfa Romeos in my opinion. At least over the last few weekends, and will be in the future. But that just goes to show how, I wouldn't say how bad a job Nicholas Latifi is doing, but that Nicholas Latifi, this might be the last season for Nicholas Latifi in Formula One, because Williams, even though he's a paid driver, Williams does have the backing and the capital now to continue on as its own team. So that might not be a factor anymore, and Williams might want another talent like George Russell, a junior talent, or even like a senior person to step into the team and lead them over the next 3 years in the new regulations. And I think having someone like Nicholas Latifi won't help them grow as a team.
Exactly. And I mean, even if George Russell is outperforming the Williams car by 150%, let's say, Nicholas Latifi still needs to be competitive and close to his teammate, right? And we saw this with Stoffel Van Doorn in McLaren. He was beaten by Fernando Alonso very badly and could not recover, and like his Formula One career was over right there. So definitely, as you said, that Williams now has the financial backing, and they don't need Latifi with that pay seat anymore as such. So definitely he needs to up his game if he needs to stay in the.
I mean, he's been struggling to get out of
Q1.
Q1 recently, and that's not boding well for him. But we'll see what happens. We'll see if George goes to Mercedes or not. I have a comment about that at the end of this podcast. So I'll talk a little bit more about silly season and the second Mercedes seat towards the end, or the second Red Bull seat for next year towards the end, per se. But talking about Alpine, great outing for Alpine. Double points finish, both for Alonso finishing P6, Ocon and P9. That chassis change definitely working for Ocon, it seems. Ocon seemed a lot happier throughout the entire weekend. So definitely, maybe there was something really wrong with the chassis. Something that they may not have discovered during the checks, and we've seen that happen in the past with other drivers. But Fernando was on fire throughout the sprint race and throughout the Grand Prix yesterday. But you have to give it to Fernando. Bottas couldn't make the softs work, but Fernando jumped from P11 to P5 in a matter of few corners in the sprint race, and it was just exciting to see Fernando. I think that was like the most action we had during the sprint race, and it was all because of Fernando almost.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think that is, and we'll talk about this later. We'll review the sprint race later, but that just shows us how important sprint races can be for teams for the teams in the low midfield, and I mean, and it also shows that Fernando Alonso of the past is back in Formula One.
I was skeptical.
And he's hungry.
Absolutely. I was skeptical at the start of the season, and I said it on the podcast that I didn't think Fernando could get up to speed fast enough for the season. But I'm glad to be proven wrong, and Fernando has just been on fire the entire. After the first couple of races, he's just been he's been on the pace absolutely, and he's given us a good show too. It's not like Fernando has made it boring, but he's given us a great show.
Yeah,
and I'm really happy for it. But looking at the bigger picture, Alpine is actually now in contention for P5 for real. Alpine had been behind both AlphaTauri and Aston Martin a couple races ago. They were trailing them by about 10-11 points, but now by over 15 points. But now they're only behind by 9 points. compared to AlphaTauri who are in P5 and only they're trailing Aston Martin only by 8 points in the Constructors' Championship. So, and I think they're the strongest team. They're looking like the strongest team going into the rest of the season. And I think they're on for a good P5 finish.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AlphaTauri, even this weekend, Pierre Gasly was struggling with the car a lot, and Yuki Tsunoda only managed to, bring home 1 point. So that fight for P5 is definitely heating up. As you said, Alpine is looking the strongest, and I agree with that completely. Not only because I want Fernando to succeed, but because Aston Martin and AlphaTauri have been on a roller coaster ride this season. They have been fast some places, they have been underperforming some places, especially AlphaTauri after the preseason testing. Everyone expected them to fight the McLarens, but so far they haven't been able to do so, and they are so far back now they can't fight them. But yeah,
absolutely.
P5, bring it on.
Yep, absolutely. Talk about Aston Martin. Disappointing weekend for Vettel, spinning once again on his own. Kind of embarrassing there, and had to retire the car later on in the race. Hopefully, Vettel will recover from that. Although we did see Sebastian Vettel, join the cleaning crew after the race, helping clean up the grandstands once the fans had left the Silverstone complex. But Lance Stroll bringing in some points for the Aston Martin team. So, not all bad. Aston Martin didn't bring a lot of updates during the Austin GP weekend and the Silverstone weekend. So, I think the fight is still on for P5 even from Aston Martin. Hopefully, Sebastian and Stroll can put it together and, they can work together to get some more points home for the team. Because at the start of the season, Lawrence Stroll was about to, take it to Mercedes for the championship battle, but so far they've been pretty disappointing throughout the first 10-11 rounds of the season.
I mean, see, talking about Sebastian Vettel, for me he was the villain from 2010 to 2013 because he was winning and Fernando was always second. But so far this season he is redeeming himself pretty well with the litter cleanup this weekend, with the B hotel in Austria a few weeks back. So I mean, honestly, he's genuinely become a much nicer person than his Red Bull days. Obviously, he's more mature and everything, but it's great to see a character like Sebastian Vettel in Formula One, who acknowledges all these other things and goes about doing them.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, he is a fan favorite. Like we've said so many times. You can't hate on Sebastian Vettel. At least ever since he moved out of Red Bull, he is a fan favorite, and you can only love him a lot. But that was all for this weekend, I guess. For most parts, we'll talk about the sprint race and we'll talk about the 2022 car that we saw unveiled last Thursday. But just to mention, it's been really disheartening to see how some fans have responded to Lewis Hamilton and, the incident. Lewis Hamilton has faced a lot of abuse online, and that is really disheartening to see. So I would really, really encourage everyone to, look out for that and not take part in any such things, Obviously, what happened on Sunday was not Lewis didn't do it on purpose. And it was just a racing incident. So I think it's just terrible to see the community abused, basically. And I would encourage people strongly to stop taking part in such things. But let's come back to our talking points at hand. Let's talk about a sprint race. What are your thoughts on the sprint race, Vedant?
Well, as I said earlier, it's great for the midfield teams because they can make up a lot of places. It's way worse for the leading teams, as we saw from Sergio Perez. He spun out and he lost. I mean, he had to retire the car towards the end. So he started in the pit lane. He started the Grand Prix in the pit lane. But overall, I think this was an isolated Grand Prix and we can't really conclude anything from that. It can be an outlier. But the general, I think we saw this in this weekend also. After the first few laps, it sort of settles down because everyone can make up a few places in the first few laps, and then there's a train because you don't want to risk too much, because while there's a reward of a place gained, the risk and the risk is far greater. So I think it might get even more boring in Monza, where it is supposed to happen.
And overtaking
the
is
second
pretty
sprint race
difficult
is
in
supposed to
Monza with the
happen.
new cars. If you're being honest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So, what is your verdict?
I
Would you
think
like to see more sprint races? Were you happy with those sprint races that we had? What is your verdict about it? And how did you think the sprint race affected the entirety of the weekend? Because we had the Q2 tire rule thrown out for the Grand Prix on Sunday, so we had everyone starting on whatever tires they wanted to start. So, what is your overall, what do you think of the overall impact the sprint race had on the weekend, and whether that would be something you would like to see in F1 again?
well, I have spoken about this earlier. I don't like the way Formula One is going about these sprint races specifically. So I think 3 races this season are well enough to mix things up. Obviously, the impact on the GP is far lesser than the FIA and Formula One would have imagined, in my opinion. But I don't think we need these sprint races in 2022 with those new cars.
Yeah, we should.
That's the main thing here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the races in 2022 should be much closer in generally, and the reason sprint races were introduced mainly was to base improve racing this season. But I think there's also a financial aspect to introducing sprint races, and that is to get more people on track on Friday by moving the qualifying to Friday and having a sprint race on Saturday. And I think the sprint race was pretty successful this weekend at Silverstone compared to what we were thinking. We were thinking, that the drivers are not going to be taking a lot of risks at all. We won't see something like Fernando Alonso. We won't see something like Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris trying to put in the moves. But we saw the drivers take great risks, and I think that is what made the sprint race exciting this week. And that just goes to show that no matter how long the race is, or what the long-term situation might be regarding the consequences of your actions during the sprint race, the drivers will race hard. And I think Max Verstappen came out and said that he really enjoyed the sprint race because he didn't have to conserve fuel, he didn't have to conserve tires. He could go full out, throughout the race. I think the drivers enjoyed it too. However, again, overarching impact of the sprint race didn't make a huge difference for my weekend. Had the sprint race not been there, it wouldn't have mattered to me a whole lot, personally. But I think if looking at the financial aspect of Formula One and the financial side of the sprint races, what Formula One could do is what IndyCar does: have 2 races. What a lot of other series do, have 2 races at specific weekends. So you have qualifying on Friday. So you have practice 1 on Friday. You have qualifying on Friday for race 1. Then you have race 1 on Saturday morning, and then you have qualifying 2 either on Saturday evening or on Sunday morning, and then you have the main race. Now, the 2 races could be of different lengths, and in my opinion, and the first race could be shorter with lesser points being awarded. So instead of the top 10, maybe the top 8 finishers or the top 6 finishers get points for the shorter race on Saturday, which I guess gives Formula One more time to hold a qualifying after the race, and then on Sunday you can have the usual Grand Prix that you have, and you can still have more fans in the stands and give them more racing action.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting prospect, but for me, the only people who made up places were the people who started on softs. So it was that tire offset that encouraged better racing. Obviously, the first lap is always racy, no matter what the tires are. But had the tires been similar, had all the drivers been on the same tires, I don't think Fernando Alonso could have made up
as many places,
6 places. And
I mean,
I
Fernando
don't think
did,
Kimi Raikkonen could have made up so many
places.
places.
Was on the first lap. After he made up those places, he kept falling behind. He kept falling back. It wasn't like he was making progress. The other drivers who were on mediums, obviously the medium tire lasted longer, even though they were coping with blistering, but it definitely had more race pace compared to the soft tire over the course of 17 laps. Which is what I'm saying. If you want to pack more action into the weekend, just have more racing or more, just have like more proper racing instead of doing a sprint qualifying. And I think drivers were also really disappointed the way Formula One managed like the awards. So the person who used like Hamilton didn't get the pole position award.
I was coming on to
in the history books, it will be Max Verstappen who got pole at Silverstone. So all of that is pretty awkward. So I think if Formula One wants more racing, I don't think the sprint race improved racing overall on the Sunday GP. I don't think that happened because we still had Max Verstappen, Valtteri Bottas, and Lewis Hamilton starting ahead, and then we had Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, and Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz behind them, and they didn't shuffle up the order. It didn't do anything like that. So I think if you want more racing action, just have more races. Have a shorter race on Saturday. Instead of instead of doing full distance, do like a 2/3 distance race or half distance race, and award lesser points if you want more action at certain places.
Exactly. And see, as you said, this didn't shuffle the grid up, and I think both of us agreed to this way back when it was proposed that it won't shuffle the grids up because the faster cars will always be faster, right? If they wanted to shuffle the grids up, I think they could compress the race even more. In fact, have a 5 or 7 lap race so that the offset is far greater. And the faster cars.
But then, the thing is, like the 17, the 1/3 distance was chosen because it gave you different tire strategy. You could go it gave you the tire offset strategy. If you shorten the race enough, if you go like anything below 12, 13 laps, everybody's gonna bolt on the hards and they're gonna race, right? So you don't get the tire offset strategy. If you if you make it any longer, everybody will bolt on the mediums and then go race. So that is the problem. So you have to either have that 17 lap race or have. Or have like a tire offset. Maybe give them the softest compounds. Maybe get the hyper soft and the ultra soft tires back into F1 and let them race. In like a shorter race format that you have. So obviously that is something that Formula One needs to look into, and the sprint race is not the solution for improving racing per se, in my opinion. After looking at it in Silverstone, but the one thing I liked, I was like. It didn't make a huge difference, but one thing I liked was the fact that everybody could start on whatever tires they wanted to on Sunday. Although it did take away a little bit from the strategy, how teams qualify on the mediums. But again, overall, it didn't make a huge difference for me. And if Formula One was to switch to was to get rid of the Q2 tire rule, I wouldn't make a big deal of it, and I think the racing would just still be just as interesting as it is today. But yeah, any other thoughts on the sprint race, Vedant?
No. I mean, I wasn't convinced back then. I'm not convinced still, and I don't think Formula One should keep them for 2022, at least for the first half of the season. Like, watch how the racing is going on with the new cars, and then
Absolutely.
Make
talking about the 2022 car. What were your first impressions?
Good. I mean, it certainly shows us that the path Formula One is taking is correct, because they want to make the cars cleaner and they want to remove all that dirty air. That's why the car looks so sleek. So I think that just shows us that the direction is correct in a sense, but we'll see how it affects racing later on.
How do you like the car though? The aesthetics of the car. What were your thoughts on that?
I think it looks like a Formula One car, which is the most important thing, right? The rear, and it looks futuristic, which is again very important going forward. The rear wing does not look like a Formula One car. We have seen end plates on rear wings for so long now. So I wanted to see
that bothered me a lot
in a way, but yeah. But I think overall I'm pretty happy with how it's going, and I'm pretty
obviously,
impressed.
and I think this is like the biggest project that Formula One has undertaken before before committing to rules, a new regulation set. So it just goes to show how much effort has been put in. And yeah, the car did look really good. The only thing that bothered me was, and obviously this was like one of the 3 concepts that Formula One developed, using the rules and regulations that are coming to place for 2022, and only one of them was unveiled in a full-size model to the audience. So there's also 2 other concepts that Formula One explored. That they designed 2 other cars from those based on those rules and regulations that they tested in the wind tunnel and whatever they were doing. But again, like you said, it'll be interesting to see how the teams interpret the rules. And even though Formula One wants to reduce the dirty air and allow cars to follow each other, that is not what Mercedes wants. That is not what Ferrari want. They don't want their rivals to be able to follow them closely and race them, right? They want to be able to win as easily as possible. So it'll be interesting to see how the teams capitalize on that. Although the numbers do look promising, it seems that the cars will be losing only 10 to 15% of downforce compared to 40-50% of downforce that they currently lose, and things like that. I think they address the downforce aspect of it and the tire aspect of it. I think Mario Sala was there during the unveil, and he talked about how they are trying to create compounds that have a larger operating window, and that won't heat up or start to blister or start to degrade if a car is following another car for too long. So that's another aspect that was addressed. I think the only aspect of a car following another that was not addressed was regarding airflow around the air intakes on a car, right? Because we've seen a lot of cars back out because the engine starts to overheat eventually throughout the course of the race because they've been following other cars for too long. And I think that is something that the teams will have to look into individually if they are trying to race as close as possible over a distance of 300 kilometers. But the only thing that bothered me from the unveil, I don't know, how the other concepts look that Formula One tried out. The only thing that bothered me that the nose of the 2022 car was really, really wide, and we've seen we've seen teams move away from that concept over the last 6 years in the turbo hybrid era, right? We've seen how McLaren and Ferrari both recently go to like really thin noses. We saw AlphaTauri do similar things. It was pioneered by Mercedes, really. So it'll be interesting to see how teams go about that. But definitely the wings and the barge, like there's no barge board anymore. There's no barge board section. So it does make the car look a lot simpler, a lot more approachable, and a lot more beautiful. But that is not to say, I still love the complexity of the current cars is really beautiful to me, at least personally. Even if people might not like it and people might think it looks ugly, to me it's still really exciting the way the cars look today and how much development goes into that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you there that the cars look like an engineering marvel today, and all these sticky uppy bits, as Sam Collins calls it. So all these things look incredibly complex, and it just shows you how, like, it just proves that Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsports. But at the same time, we have seen like the issue Formula One is addressing has been in Formula One for a few years now, since 2017 especially. So I think it was high time for them to address it, and I'm convinced that this will help, if not completely eliminate these issues. It will at least help them. The teams, of course, have said that the cars look pretty like their own renders and their own development looks pretty much like this. Obviously there will be some difference, a 10-15% difference, but the cars look pretty much the same. What will be interesting going into next season would be, because there's a completely new package, the entire chassis is new, and the tires are new, so the teams will have to figure out everything
from scratch,
apart from the engine.
Yep. It'll be like the 2014 season all over again, where you don't have a new engine, but you have a new chassis, you have some new rules and regulations, so something similar to that. I do like the 18-inch tires though, and I really like the tire covers or whatever they call it, so that you don't really see the rims anymore or the wheels. I kind of like that. I thought they looked good. But yeah, any other thoughts before I make this one last comment regarding Fernando Alonso? I've been saving it for the entire podcast because I think it'll make you happy and it's something interesting and it'll spice your day up. But yeah, any other closing thoughts from you, Vedant, before that?
I mean, we are heading into silly season from next weekend onwards, right? So it's about time that you make your predictions.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna throw in some silly season talk here for you to comment on. So like I said, I was skeptical about Fernando Alonso, but he's proved me wrong and he's proved a lot of people wrong, and he's shown that he's the same Fernando Alonso he was, ever since he joined Formula One. And I think the two seats that are being most talked about right now in Formula One are the Mercedes seat that is currently occupied by Valtteri Bottas, and the second seat at Red Bull currently occupied by Sergio Perez. And if I were one of those top teams and I had to, I can't decide between George Russell and Valtteri Bottas or Sergio Perez and, Pierre Gasly or Yuki Tsunoda, and had to make a left field move for a short-term contract with someone who's reliable, who I know will deliver results and might even take the fight to, the top driver in my team, I think Fernando Alonso might just be up for that. He might just be the man for the job for Mercedes or Red Bull for the next 3 seasons, or maybe a couple of seasons. He's experienced, he knows how to develop a car, and he's on the pace. Give him a championship-winning car, and we might just see Fernando Alonso light the world on fire. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would love that, and I think as fans, as a collective, community, everyone would love that. But as individuals, Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, that would be a massive, massive headache, because it would again be the same thing. You can't have two alpha drivers in the same team. But that is some very interesting prospects.
Because Fernando is really the only person currently on the grid, I would say, who could be signed by any top team for a short-term contract, and it wouldn't, there wouldn't be more questions after that about his future or anything. If he doesn't perform well, that's fine. He's towards the end of his career. But if he performs well, that's where the excitement is. And, he's been doing well. It's not like he's not doing well in Formula 1 and I'm making all of this up. But I really think that he could be someone who could inject a lot of energy into a team. And I think someone like a character like Fernando Alonso in a Red Bull, going up versus Max Verstappen, might just bring out the best in Max Verstappen. He might just push Max to the next level that Max doesn't know about.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, the Mercedes seat might be close because we've seen Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso not get along during their McLaren days, so that might be closed. But if I really had to push my number one driver further, because right now Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas, the fight between Mercedes and Red Bull is on, because neither Sergio Perez nor Valtteri Bottas are a championship-winning driver or a championship-winning teammate, right? So they're not taking away points from their respective teammates, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. But if you had suppose you had a Charles Leclerc in that second Red Bull seat who could also challenge for the win, so you would be taking points away from. So if he was in Red Bull, he would be taking points away from Mercedes much more often than what Sergio Perez is doing, right? So if you had a Fernando Alonso in that second seat in either teams, you would be taking away points from the other team just because you have a better driver in that second seat. Obviously, you're running the risk of taking away points from yourself, but it's always a gamble, because if Valtteri Bottas continues to have his inconsistent run, and Sergio Perez continues to have his inconsistent run, we don't know where the result will swing. So whichever second driver is more consistent will allow one of the two teams to win the championship regardless, right?
Yeah, I think you said it correctly, but I mean, everything you said was correct. But then again, they need a second driver, and I don't think Fernando Alonso is ready to be a second driver, and that's essentially where it gets tricky.
But then again,
I mean, Fernando Alonso would love the challenge of Red Bull, love the challenge of Mercedes, and even he himself said that his fight with Hamilton was not a personal fight as such, but it was only instigated by the management at McLaren. So he doesn't have anything against Hamilton or Verstappen, and he'll obviously push both of them if he goes to their teams. But
Hey, it's
I don't
just
think
an idea
it's
out
the
there
best.
for Helmut Marko, for Christian
Yeah.
Horner, for Toto Wolff. So, if they come across this idea, maybe Fernando Alonso is the left field move they need for the next couple of years. Maybe Toto Wolff wants to, if he wins this 8th championship on a trot. Toto Wolff has won 7 championships on the trot. If he wants to win the 8th one, this might be the left field move that Red Bull might not see coming, and it might help Toto Wolff consolidate 10 championships in a row. Just an idea out there, but that's all from my side. Anything else that you might want to talk about?
I think we covered everything pretty well in this episode, and I think we are all hungry for Hungary now.
Yes, that was well put. But thank you, Vedant, for joining me once again this weekend. And we'll get back together to preview the Hungarian Grand Prix and talk about the London E Prix weekend next week. So catch you all there. Thank you so much for joining us.